Welcome back, everybody. Joining me today is John Halbig. He has a newsletter called Of Stories and Song, and he's also the author of other books, fiction books. And he reached out to me because he has some thought-provoking questions and some good insights for stories, specifically films that I am very interested in, most notably Arrival and Interstellar. And so I thought, man, let's just dive into it. I think people are going to really appreciate that. So, John, thanks for joining.
Yeah, absolutely, Derek. Thanks for having me. Really excited to be here.
Yeah. So, real quick, maybe just what are some of the questions or some of the driving themes that are interesting you in Arrival and Interstellar, some of these other films we'll be talking about?
Yeah, well, really what made me want to reach out to you and just my own thoughts on these movies that have been developing over time is this idea of love transcending time and space. And with Arrival and the language that they speak in, just it's circular, complete, like cyclical language. It just unlocked a lot of these connections in my mind that I feel like your article about Exodus and Arrival really spoke to me. This idea of kind of cycles in life that we go through. So going from the known, comfortable world into somewhat of, chaos, going into darkness, ascending the mountain, making a journey, struggling, and through that struggle coming into another sense of rest, and then from that place of rest pushing ourselves even more, and so on and so on. And it's cool to see filmmakers speak to that from, maybe not a conscious religious place, but it's still very religious language.
Hmm.
And I thought that would be a really cool topic to get into, kind of whether they're consciously trying to talk about these things or if they're subconsciously picking up on these religious themes that they talk about. To me, that's a really interesting topic that I have some insights in, and there's a lot I'm actually quite curious about too. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Okay. Well, before we get into that, I just wanted to share my screen and have people check out your new Substack, which I'm pretty excited
Oh,
about, especially if
yeah.
you just look at the titles, The Courage to Be Loved and The Love of the Father. So obviously this theme of love and generations is coming up a lot already in the first couple of publications that you posted.
Yeah.
The second screen I shared is Blind Interference, which is your book.
Yeah.
So you wrote a novel. It's published. We're looking at Amazon's page, and so, and it looks like eternity rests in a single moment. So it seems like these are definitely some themes that you're wrestling with even in your own work.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. What's really cool is I'm 34 years old right now, but through college is really when I started kind of diving into storytelling, and I started with screenplay writing, and my style and interests have always been very like abstract. So I mean, the writing in my 20s was hilarious, and some of it was actually like really cool that I'd love to incorporate now that I have kind of a different point of view. But it was just all over the place. Like the first story I ever wrote was of uh, like this guy who was living in the woods who could kind of like fly around based off the energy of trees nearby him. So he's like flying all over the place and ascends up to space because he's pulling from the energy of stars and stuff like that. So like
Man, that
right
sounds like
away,
it's right up there with the fountain.
exactly, yeah. So all
That's
these
great.
stories that influence me, I'm just like, how can I take it to an
Yeah.
even weirder level? But yeah, no,
Awesome. You're my kind of guy, John. I like it.
for sure. Yeah, yeah, I could tell for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. And then in your writing, before we were recording, you mentioned that you're part of a writing group. Could you just elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, it's been wonderful. I'm part of a writing group online. It's hosted by Deekus Nicolin Kotar, who you recently had on your channel.
Yeah, it's great.
Great, great interview. Really loved it. But yeah, there's last time I checked, probably about 40 people online. A little bit less that are consistently active, but still a really strong amount of people who are active. And we really share kind of on a weekly basis. We have an accountability page that says what we've been up to the last week, books we're reading, themes and ideas we're interested in, kind of what stage of the writing process we're in for our own stories. And then uh, Deacon Kotar, he also hosts a video about once a week. So sometimes it's a interview with another author. Sometimes it's just a like an hour long, hour and a half long conversation with his own advice as an author, either on the business side or on the writing side.
Mm.
So we have some like writing sprints together, sometimes two. So all of us just sit down and have a conversation like this for about 10 minutes and then just turn off our cameras and all write together for about an hour, which is nice. That's honestly been some of the best writing I've gotten done in the last couple of weeks. So
Yeah, there you go.
it's really great. He has so much going on, and the fact that he put this together for a lot of people shows what a good guy he is.
Yeah, awesome. Well, shout out to Deacon Nicholas. It's so funny because he was saying some of the similar things like, wow, we have some really great people in this writing group and doing awesome things and it's good energy and good vibe. And so didn't know that before we agreed to talk that you're part of that group. And so as
Yeah.
coincidence would have it, the very next person I talked to here on the podcast is involved with that group too. So there you go.
Oh yeah.
Check it out, folks. If you're a writer or a creative person that could use to have that supportive group. Sounds like a
Absolutely.
great opportunity.
It's honestly been one of the most wonderful things too. I think about the symbolic world kind of larger community that seems to keep growing and growing, is that it it keeps motivating people, I think, to keep popping up, who says like, oh, well, if Jonathan Pajot's talking about this stuff, maybe I can too. And Nicholas Kotar and Richard Rowland and
Yeah.
all these guys who are just like, to me, geniuses. I'm like, oh my gosh, it's like this never ending well of knowledge and just nice and cool people too. So it's
Yeah.
been one of the most hopeful things I've seen pop up, certainly on the online space in the last couple of years.
Yeah. And so grows the tree. See all these branches extending
Yeah.
out. Yeah. So let's dive into it. If we're looking at love and time, I find that the director Villeneuve, Denis Villeneuve,
Mm-hmm.
if you look at the course of his films, he's been wrestling with this theme of time. I mean, no matter what the film has its, distinct themes and characters and stories, but you can see this through line, this thread. If you're to pull it, it'd be this wrestle with either death or eternity or some element of time. And for example, in Arrival, obviously, it's the predominant thing because the alien species, their big gift, what they give humanity is their language, what gives us the ability to unlock time or think from a higher dimension, lifts us up above just our temporal time from, beginning, middle, end, beginning or from arrival of our birth to the arrival of death.
Mm.
And in that, there's also this relationship between, especially the mother and the daughter, but also the husband and the wife, where you see that relationship plays a key point in how it relates to time. And you see this love of a mother that's telling the story of a daughter, but really from the beginning to the ending of her life, and how love is almost like a hint or like we're looking through a window vaguely into a deeper realm because we have the capacity to, through memory, through love, to transcend far beyond, a lifespan, far beyond just a specific block of time. So that's what I've noticed. How about yourself, John?
Yeah. Well, and what I think of too in terms of love and arrival and just that idea of kind of the cycle, and the end is the beginning, is the
Mhm.
end is the beginning, is that if you have something that in a sense transcends time and space that gets rid of our thought of looking at things kind of as um like progressing towards something, but rather see the cycle nature of it. It's not that you're really competing anymore. You're kind of giving yourself, you're offering yourself to something,
Mm.
which is, I think, ultimately what love is, especially in the Christian sense of Jesus sacrificing himself. It's the idea of you're not conquering, which is kind of their original language, right? You know, what's everyone trying to do? Oh, here's the aliens. How do we fight them? You know, everyone's arguing with each other and they're not really speaking the common language. Everyone's still very divided. But with love, there's that sense of self-emptying and giving of yourself and being open to what you don't understand that really allows for the part of love that lasts eternally to really come into you. Because it, especially if you think of kind of the exodus dynamic of things, if you only stay where you're comfortable at, and if you only stay where you know, you're going to miss out on so much of what love calls you to do, which is
Yeah.
to be open to the foreign perspective, right? Because if you love someone, part of that is acknowledging that this someone is other than me, right? I
Yeah.
I love I love you. When you say I love you to someone, you emphasize that you're separate, but you're joining yourself with them with that kind of act of submission or
Mm.
love. So I think it's really that act of moving from seeing language as a weapon, right? You know, what do they get
Mm.
confused earlier on? Oh,
Yeah.
they interpret it as weapon. No, it's tool, it's language, it's something that is useful rather than to be used as a weapon. So that's my initial kind of thoughts.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, because if you can see language as a weapon, which it totally can be, they say sticks and stones can't break my bones, but words will never hurt me. It's like, well, they're pretty hurtful. And so, yeah, if you use words well, they can, open up so much more. And then if you look at really like if you look at Genesis and how they frame reality as, a language, then we're living words. And so or we're cosmic words, as Mathieu wrote in his book, Mathieu Pajot.
Mhm.
And if we look at ourselves as cosmic words, then we have a definition, a purpose, and we can have a purpose. And what is a purpose but its end? It's like these things they're all tied together, identity, purpose, end. And what's really amazing is that we can have a purpose that's part of a cause that's greater than ourselves, something that could last years beyond our life, thousands of years. We're part of that greater story, which I think Arrival's getting into because it's like we all have a part to play in that story, and we couldn't ever imagine what the story would be like without that character. We couldn't imagine the world without
Mm,
John or Derek or, our kids. We couldn't imagine, even if their part in it is very brief, it wouldn't be the same story without them.
right. Yeah, I like that. Well, then think of too the heptapod language. You have the circle, so it's kind of like this eternity, this cycle. But then what differentiates like each word or each sentence is, you kind of have the little fabrics, the little threads that spike off and branch off from the circle too. So you have the kind of eternity, but also the particular too.
Oh, yeah,
Each,
yeah. That's interesting. I hadn't thought about that.
yeah,
Yeah, because they're all each, logogram, or we can call it word, is circular. It has the same dimension, but then what makes it distinct is the little ink blotches and little kind of like curls that come off of it.
yeah. So it's like, so even with word in every bit of language they do, there's like even a pattern in that that says, okay, well, here's the like the general, the eternal, and here's the particular, even with each
Right.
word we say. So there's like a call to remembrance of that, even with everything that they say. Yeah.
Yeah. Now let's talk more about the memory.
Mm.
And I know that when I rewatched Interstellar recently, that's the scene where there's the well, really the trialogue where they're talking about which planet do we go to, and ultimately they decide to choose which planet to go to based on love, based on this drawing,
Mm.
because the argument is that it is a some type of foretaste, or we get like a glimpse of something beyond us, and it's so deeply embedded in us, and it's so universal that maybe we should go based on that and not just mere rationality alone, not just something that our minds could, conjure up. Maybe it doesn't quantitatively make sense to go to this planet versus that planet. Uh, but my heart is telling me to go, and maybe we should go with that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and what's so fascinating too about Cooper, the main character who the story revolves around, is I feel like the whole entire movie, he's struggling with this idea of, you know, the scientific thing to do, the logical thing to do, and his love for his daughter. Because at
Yes.
the very start of the film, his daughter, is like, there is the ghosts, this and this. And he's like, oh, that's not very scientific, Murph. And
Yeah.
the brother is kind of nagging at her, like poking fun, and she's sticking out her tongue at him. Common sibling dynamics. But she says, well, you said, science is about admitting what you don't understand. And he
Yeah.
says,
That's
okay.
right.
So he says, so all right, so do this with your ghost. He's like, here's what you got to do. You have to record results, record your observations, and um, he lists a few other things, and then come back to me. And, she's excited about that. She's like, all right, well, my dad's listening to me a little bit. He wants me to participate, so she gets excited about that and starts recording the kind of anomalies that happen. And yeah, it's just a very common uh, war that he battles with throughout the movie, is this idea of like, what's the logical thing to do? And then the people in his life who are whispering words of encouragement of like, there's more to it than just that. You have to take a leap of faith,
Yeah.
essentially.
I'm not sure they actually say those words, which
I
is
don't think,
interesting. So here's a few things,
yeah,
John, is so let me get back to that faith point.
okay.
Um, what's interesting is that he's wrestling with this ghost, right?
Mhm.
And it's this ghost, you know, I think at this point, let's just lift off the censors of spoilers. And folks, if you haven't, go watch these movies, push pause right now and just, come back in about 8 hours and we'll be
Yeah.
right here. Or just enjoy the themes for what they are, and bear with the details of the examples here. But so with the ghost, he's wrestling with this ghost. His daughter doesn't seem to have an issue with it, which is really interesting. You kind of get to that purity. And I'm going to use some terms that are new to me because I'm reading The Ethics of Beauty by Dr. Timothy Petitsis. Are you familiar with that book? Have you read it?
I'm not, but I'd love to read it.
Oh, yeah,
Just-
it's just right over here. Let me grab it really quick. Really quick. Yeah, I shouldn't go 5 feet without it, but here we go. So it's not a small book. It's like, I don't know, 8 books, and they
oh,
cram it in here.
yeah.
I'm thinking about reaching out to Colin and be like, dude, can you make a hard cover version of this book, but break it into like 3 or 5 books? Because I'm
Yeah.
trying to like trying to hold this thing up while I'm like sleeping. I'm like, oh, or
Right.
like laying in bed about to sleep. I'm like, dude, my arms are tired.
Yeah.
This thing's
And
dangerous.
give
I
it
could
and
drop this.
give it a beautiful cover for each version too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So maybe Colin's listening. Hopefully there's a spark of inspiration there. But something that he brings up is that there's two types of, well, just to keep it simple, there's of the different types of love, the two that really are interesting, the distinguishing between these two has really helped my thinking, and that's between eros and agape.
Mm.
And you mentioned the self-sacrificial love, which is agape,
Yeah.
but that is what unfolds from eros, or that desire, that drawing, that desire of seeing something that's beyond yourself, seeing something that's, say, like the expression of a pure pattern, something that draws us. And what's interesting is you see this in kids, is that they have a pure eros, or their desire is that's why they're so filled with wonder, they're so filled with awe. And you see that in Cooper's daughter,
Mm.
and how Murph is, she doesn't have issues with the ghost who's like knocking down books from the shelf, who's like messing with the dust and the light, and gravity's all funky in this room. And she doesn't seem to have an issue with it because she has this pure arrow. She has a pure desire, this drawing to something that's transcendent. Meanwhile, her dad is like, you got to treat this scientifically. She's
Yeah.
like, okay, dad, I guess. And then she's writing things down, which is interesting because as soon as you write down words, they're dead. They're static. They're no longer dynamic. So they kind of leave that realm of like if you look at Genesis, they don't have spirit, they don't have breath in them because they're not being spoken. Every word we speak has a breath. And then when we write it down, it's a different type of dynamic.
Yeah.
So maybe I'll pause there. Did you have anything you wanted to spring off of there?
Well, I do. And real quick before I say my thoughts on that, I will say what I've noticed too, just about the written word versus the spoken word. I've been reading out loud
Oh,
from now on. When I read the Bible, when I read books now, almost every time, maybe not all the time, but I've noticed not only how much it improves my reader experience, but just in my personal life, I feel so much more energy, a lot more like confidence in what I do, just speaking more because all of a sudden I'm hearing my voice as opposed to just having it all up in my mind
oh,
all
yeah,
the time. It's marrying that like mind and body. Like it's I never realized just how much of a bodily exercise it is to speak. And um yeah, so it's that marriage of the two between like uh spirit and body or mind and body.
yes.
And I think with Interstellar, with Murph and that child like mystery and wonder of everything, I think it sticks with her character throughout the movie. You know, there's
Even when she does become the scientist.
right, even when she
Yeah.
does become a scientist, because there's this hope that, maybe I'll see my dad again someday, or this hope of um I think the ghost really sets the like the precedent for her to maintain that throughout the story. And and it's kind of what actually I was just talking about because she doesn't just stay in this like esoteric like supernatural ghost land. She's a mathematician, she's a scientist, so she's focused on the physical world and she's dedicates her life to that as well, but she has this experience of the ghost and that sense of mystery, and I feel like that's why ultimately it leads to her being able to kind of um, to bridge that gap. Yeah.
Yeah, very interesting how she's
Mhm.
able to keep it and be able to, well, obviously makes the breakthrough of, I don't know, humanity's history,
Mhm.
solving the gravity piece. But she's also she never gives up on the ghost. And here's the ironic thing with Cooper, Matthew McConaughey's character. He he he's wrestling with his ghost, and then in the end you realize, oh my gosh, he's wrestling with himself.
Right.
He's
So,
wrestling with himself the whole time.
so let me tell you why Interstellar means so much to me. When I saw it in theaters, it was actually just me. So you can imagine the Tesseract scene like would be like this transcendental experience. Here's Matthew McConaughey floating through this Tesseract, like infinite space, it seems like this infinite moment. And here I am in this massive theater all by myself, like I'm floating by myself, watching this
Oh,
big screen event.
yeah.
Man, I was just sitting there. I wasn't like crying, like, oh, sobbing, but just tears coming down my eye, dude, just because it was like, it was so beautiful to me. And like, not beautiful, like, oh, look at this sunset, but like beautiful, like, I feel like what we've been talking about, like, I feel like I'm completely out of anything I understand right now, but there's something real happening here. And I think that's what it is. It's having this sense of like journeying out into what you don't understand, but the fact that there's love there is like what keeps you from falling into fear and doubt. You
Mm,
know what I mean?
hmm
It's that connection of love that makes um being unbound by time and space, being able to come back into that to find somebody. Because if you think of that in terms of like, ultimate freedom, it's like if you give someone ultimate freedom without context, um, it almost becomes death, like just the breaking down of everything. If um, like if death
mm,
is like like the dissolving of your body, yourself into, the great, people who don't believe in the soul just say like, oh, I die and then I become part of the earth. And what does that mean? Oh, my cells, everything just becomes the wind and floats off everywhere. It's like you just dissolve into everything. And if you don't have the belief in resurrection and of the soul and of spirit and of love that brings everything back together, then that sense of um, being unbound by time and space, I feel like becomes death. And what I feel like really happens at the end of the story is, whether in reality or whether symbolically, I think it can honestly be interpreted either way. He falls into kind of like this black hole almost. And if it's not a real death, it's certainly some sort of symbolic death and
oh,
becomes unbound by time and space. And at that point, when you're stripped from matter, from the scientific world, right? From anything you can study or really grasp, at that point, he's forced to cling on to the other thing he has, which is the love for his daughter.
mm,
So the whole time, he's
mm,
journeying through space, he's trying to solve everything, he's piloting everything, he's making like these crazy cool maneuvers. He's a master of science and space in a sense. And yet he's getting farther and farther away from his daughter. He's mastering space, but he's moving farther and farther away from his daughter. And then at the end, when he makes an act of sacrifice to save Brand so that she can get away, I feel like it plunges him from really grasping on to the material world. He's able to let go in a bit. And in that letting go, he reconciles that everything's actually about love, which is what Brand speaks to him about earlier on
mm.
the ship. She says that love is what transcends time and space. We love people who have died. They're no evolutionary benefit to us. It's just a memory of a person, and yet they're still with us. So he's put into this situation where he understands that it's that love that communicates things. But what's interesting is that what's constructed for him is still space in a sense. It's the library, it's the bookshelf, it's his daughter's room. It's like it's kind of this one this one space over time. It's different scenes throughout that room's lifespan, his daughter's lifespan. And I don't want to ramble too much longer, but you know what I mean? It's what makes the movie so interesting for me. It's because you could think about it so much. But yeah, it's
Hmm.
the idea that love love is so powerful that it can't be defeated by space or by time.
Hmm.
And what really brings someone into rest is that if you give yourself to that, you you won't die. Now, obviously, in a Christian sense, we understand that Jesus is love. So, it's when I say that, I don't mean it in like some new agey hippie sense. It's love is Christ. That's what the fulfillment of our love means. And that's what Christ does. He goes down into death and says, there's nowhere where my love can't reach you.
Hmm.
And it's that acceptance that brings you into eternity. Yeah. So there you go.
Yeah. Um, it's almost like the darkness and the void of space is like a womb.
Mm,
And so as you're talking about how he goes into this black hole, pretty menacing looking thing, because it's like this like broken up sun with a just dark, completely black center. It's like fascinating visually, but as he like gives that like it's the furthest he is away from his daughter, from the thing, the person of his love, and he lets go, and it's interesting. So there's like a double sacrifice because he's saving, yeah, so he's saving one person and then just diving into the abyss of this black hole with this hope. It's really interesting how, they Interstellar, they don't talk about the only thing they talk about explicitly is love and time. But in it, the story communicates faith and hope as well.
yeah.
And so you just see how he has this end, this hope of reuniting with his daughter. And that drives him, like you said, to conquer the impossible. You even have this like super duper robot next to him. It's like, this is not possible. Why are you even trying it? And here he does. It's like this miracle moment where he can reattach to the space station and away they go. But then it's like he descends into this darkness. It's like he's being laid into the ground or laid into a tomb. And that place becomes like a womb of rebirth for him because then he gets rebirthed. And it's only then he goes from the absolute furthest place that he descended to in the deepest, darkest of space into a black hole that he wakes up and he's right next to where he can be reunited with his daughter again.
Yeah.
How interesting.
Yeah. And if you think about it too, and I feel like this all ties into the Exodus story, absolutely, and into
Oh yeah,
Arrival.
how so?
Well, even just going into outer space, I don't know if it's the ancients thought about this somewhere. I forget where I heard it, but I think I remember hearing that they used to think of outer space almost kind of as like another sea, or like the sea above us,
Mm,
something like that, like the dark sea. So if you think of exploring, going out into the seas, it's like that's kind of, and certainly going into outer space, leaving Earth, it's one of the ultimate ways of leaving the known world for sure. And then not just going into black space, but going into a wormhole, falling into a black hole. It's like it's it's constantly like the ultimate form of leaving the known world and um,
Yeah.
going into exile. And
Yeah.
when you do that, though, that's why it's important to have like the guiding light or the when you're venturing into the cave, the rope to hold on to lead yourself back to the light. Because if not, you just kind of lose yourself in that darkness.
Hmm.
And what's really interesting too, just in science fiction stories as a whole, and even in our world now, is that idea of kind of plunging into the darkness, into the womb. The word matrix actually means womb, which is,
Matrix does?
yeah,
Oh,
it blew my mind when I first read that. So, we have the ultimate sci-fi movie of, we live in uh, a simulation program world. And it's like called the Matrix. What does the Matrix mean? The womb. Oh, well, that's
wow.
really
No
interesting.
way.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So that blew my mind. And, you think of like 2001 Space Odyssey, you have the catalysts that um, propel human knowledge forward. And what does it look like? It kind of looks like a big iPhone,
Oh yeah.
like
Go figure.
a computer screen or something, like the black screen. So there's this fascination of that in all these sci-fi stories of, going into the dark unknown. And I think what is a really cool opportunity for um, storytellers who are Christian, you hear a lot of like, oh, Christian fiction's not too great, don't read that. And I kind of understand what people are saying with that, but you can, I think it really gives an opportunity to have that dynamic of like, okay, well, here's all this, um, whether it's technology talking about, or talking about the matrix, the womb, talking about space exploration and black holes as this kind of cave or womb, um, but also the idea of something that I've really been exploring is the shepherd,
Hmm.
everything. So though I walk through the valley, the shadow of death, I fear no evil,
Oh
for
yeah. Right.
with this idea that as we go through these explorations, and no matter where we go, we have that light of Christ that's guiding us.
Oh yeah.
What's so cool for storytellers, if you're a Christian now, it's just people are, we have the framework set up of going off into the darkness, right? People are used to that. And why I love Interstellar and Arrival is because I feel like here's two stories that do a great job of showing, we're going into the darkness, and yet love is guiding us out.
Hmm.
I think, they might not necessarily be thinking of Jesus in this sense, but
Yeah.
still, I think, eternity is written in the human heart.
Hmm.
I think that they're brave enough, um, artists and storytellers, that they're just willing to allow themselves to experience things in an honest way and tell that through story.
Yeah.
Christopher Nolan is married and has kids, and I feel Interstellar is a very personal
Oh
movie.
yeah. Let's talk about that for a sec because,
Yeah.
you know, some people ask me like, "Oh, what's your top five movies?" I don't know, maybe I'll make a viral video one of these days about that. But in the meantime, I realized once I wrote out my top five, I was like, "Oh, there's an obvious theme for me in Interstellar and Arrival are in it is because there's such strong themes of parenthood.
Mm.
And in Arrival, it's that relationship between the mother and the daughter primarily. And then you have in Interstellar that relationship between the father and the daughter. And so it just makes me want to be a good dad. It makes me cherish my kids like you wouldn't believe. Like I tear up every time. Oh my gosh. First scene in Arrival with the montage that tells the whole story of Hannah's life, beginning to end, gets me every time. And then the second one is in Interstellar near the end, whenever speaking of hope, the daughter, yeah, we haven't talked about the daughter side of it because she talk about facing the darkness of the unknown. She never thought that she would ever see her, or she didn't know for sure if she was going to see her dad again. And everybody told her to move on, to mourn his death. He's never coming back. And she lives just about her whole life, a long life into her elderly years. And then just at the end, she gets to see him again. And she said, I never stopped believing. I just knew deep down that I would see him again. And they're like, why, why? It's like, because my dad made a promise.
Uh,
My dad made a promise. And I'm just like, my father's heart is just like, oh
yeah.
man. So talking like tying it back to language and words, like how important it is, the words that we say, that they can live on, not just like the words that I write, like books that I could, oh shoot, I forgot. I haven't plugged the book project for Arrival yet, but it's okay. Check out the links in the description. Um, I'm new to that. I don't know. I need to get better at
Oh, me
them.
too.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
bear with me, folks. So if I type out words on the page and they can see this art, it's an artifact. Written words become artifacts. But that she holds those living words, those promises, right? So promises are living words that transcend time. They transcend time, or they kind of enter into that eternal realm where eternity is not well, it's of course it's symbolically it's a circle because a circle is a perfect shape. I get that, but it seems to be like kind of like from the place where formulas come from, right? A formula is a formula, right? The a squared plus b squared equals c squared. It's consistent across time, it's dependable. And so if we're drawing from that type of realm of patterns and meaning, promises are like little gifts from that place. And for her to say that, of course, that opens up the discussion of what I draw from, in addition to just the family and the parenting element. It's that it really, I don't know if they intended to do this. I don't know if Nolan or the writers or whoever was a part of this process intended to do this, but I find it's really helpful for me to engage with the dynamic of understanding God as a person
Yes.
and as a father, a
Yes.
loving father. I know, well, let me just say this first, that Cooper's love for his daughter and how it can transcend time. It's just beautiful to see her response of I believed because my dad told me. And if you can look at the Bible, one of the ways to look at the Bible is a book of promises. And if you read those, like they're across generations, they're promises for all of the children of God. It's like it just really opens up a lot. It opens up a lot to start shining light on some deeper understanding.
Yeah. Well, and when Jesus is baptized too, you have God the Father in heaven who says, behold, my beloved Son, of whom I'm well pleased. And it's God the Father giving the identity to the Son. This is my Son who I love. Like, this is who you are. You think of, we were talking about the the
Mm,
idea of these two filmmakers, Denis and Christopher Nolan, who have kind of very ambiguous, confused characters in a lot of their movies. And you even look at our world now, and a lot of people struggle with identity and finding their place. But then you think of the baptism and Jesus being baptized and God the Father saying, behold, this is my son who I love. And it's like that's how you understand your identity.
mm,
It's through the love of the Father. That's where your ultimate identity comes from. Everything else, brother, friend, coworker, all that stuff, it's kind of fractal and like there's different layers to it. But
right.
ultimately, that's our highest identity is a person who's loved by the Father. That's the ultimate identity that we
Yeah.
have.
And you see that in their relationship. Coop knows his daughter, right? That
Oh
scene with the school teachers, and he just knows her. He knows it's almost like he has a knowing of her end and the purpose and the calling that she has too. And it's really sweet for me because it's very similar to the dynamic that I have with my firstborn,
yeah. Mm.
where I just have I don't know the exact title of what her job's going to look like, or, but like I have a feeling I will not be surprised.
Mm.
Just that knowing of like, yeah, that's not you, or like, yeah, that's totally you. Because, I mean, the way she acted in the womb, I was not surprised with how she acted outside of it. You know,
Yeah.
she was very squiggly and wrestly. She was always kicking and elbowing and all of these. And then when you get out, she's just like this, like a tough, we call her a quail because Abigail Quail, our quail girl. It's just, you look at even these like coordinate, like just how she moves. And it's like, I'm not surprised.
Yeah.
That also, like, that's just one simple example of course, and you start looking at personality traits and calling and attitudes and how she, the gifts that she gives the world. A father just knows,
Mm.
a father knows.
Yeah. Well, and I'm sure too, there's probably an element of it's well, and I think that's what it is. Like your love gives that identity in a sense, or your love gives that understanding of your relationship with her. It's like, I don't have children yet, but I can imagine, when you have your child and as you see them grow, there's this sense of, they're going to make mistakes along the way and you're going to make mistakes along the way. And it's like, and well, what keeps families together? It's love. It's like that's the only thing that can keep families together or any relationship because people are
Yes.
going to make mistakes. They're going to betray each other. They're going to get angry and yell and they're going to want to run away. Um, and in a sense, in some strange sense, like I said with Cooper, he wars with two parts of himself. In a sense, he kind of does run away. There's part of him that's going to space to save his daughter.
Yeah.
There's part of him that's going to space because he misses being a big shot pilot. He misses,
Right. Oh, yes.
yeah,
So that's the part that I just love that tension because man, you will feel it as a dad. I don't know if you feel it. Yeah, because if you get to the point where you feel like you're being tugged by both hands, like I feel like I have a calling on my life that only I can answer. And I want to set the example of how to respond to that calling with responsibility and with discipline and just wholeheartedness. But the tension is that what if that means I spend a lot of time away from my family? And I don't know if it gets more of an extreme example than I'm called to be a space pilot and I'm
right.
called to go through a wormhole and through a black hole and be, outside the Milky Way galaxy.
Yeah,
It couldn't be further away from his daughter, and he spends her whole life not physically there, but then he's at the same time, she it takes her a long time to get there, but she accepts. That's a huge part of these themes with both of these movies is death and acceptance.
yeah,
Like she accepts that, I mean, she keeps hope alive, but at the same time, she has an acceptance eventually that he's living his life. It's almost like a death to the adolescent self. And she
mm,
always keeps that youthful hope, that eros of like being drawn to wonder that there's something more. But she
yeah,
also has that death of the adolescent self where she crosses over into, and I mean, we all get there eventually, where you start looking at your mom and your dad with more understanding of like, they're people too.
yeah.
They're not gods to us.
They don't know all the answers.
Yes,
Or maybe I know some things better, and it's like, whoa, that's scary. It's like I'm the
yes.
person who I have to start trusting.
Or that you can exceed them. And
Yeah,
of
yeah,
course, they name the space station, I forget, yeah, whatever the space station that is essentially the intergalactic arc,
Mhm.
and they named it after her, not him. And so it's like that opportunity to stand on the shoulders of giants kind of moment where it's like, and just that feeling of a father where it's like getting back to that tension of yourself, but then you're at the same time you're self-sacrificing in agapic love for the betterment of other people around you, and most predominantly your children and the next generation.
Yeah.
And so they just play well on that tension the whole way, just the whole
Oh,
way.
absolutely. And what's so cool too, in a lot of these movies we're talking about, it's um, like what you were saying with the space exploration is like the ultimate example of, being away from your family. And
Yeah,
it's
this
like,
is not just like a convention work trip or something.
right. But it's so cool that they can do that. And, I feel like they spent a lot of their careers making movies so that a studio would trust them enough to give them money that they can make a movie like this.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because it's like, in some sense, you need to do crazy examples for a lot of people to like wake them up to some of these
Yeah.
ideas or to plant that seed.
Yep.
Like with the Matrix, you have a lot of philosophy in there, but um, you can look at it on one way of just being like, oh, that was a cool movie where people are shooting each other and like flying all over the place.
Yeah.
But then if
Action-packed
you look,
thriller.
yeah, but then if you start looking into it more, you're like, oh, whoa, that's actually kind of deep. Oh, that's an interesting idea. And it's same
Yes.
with Interstellar. It's like it's to me, it's just so cool. It's like you're traveling through space, you're going through wormholes, you have these crazy, beautiful images, and yet what I'm taking away from the movie at the very end is like the simple love of a father and daughter. And it's like it's so cool
Yeah.
that when nearly 3 hour movie of flying through space, and the ultimate takeaway I have from it is just something very simple and beautiful.
Yes.
Yeah.
A note too, when we're talking about the wilderness, and I just wanted to connect two ideas that we brought up.
Hmm.
When we enter the wilderness, or when the Israelites entered the wilderness, their father, right, their God, he gives them a promise, like that there's going to be a land flowing with milk and honey. And that gives them that destination point, that gives them that fuel of hope that propels their journey to go through 40 years in the desert wilderness, the void, the darkness, and to enter that sandy sea of chaos, and then to get through it, to cross the Jordan and to enter into the land of promise, is because their father promised that they would arrive there.
Hmm.
And so that kind of touches back to Arrival.
Yeah.
The book that Ted Chiang wrote, he talks a little bit more in explicit terms, more of philosophical and scientific vocabulary. They really lay out a teleological worldview or philosophy,
Mhm.
or in Christian terms, like an eschatological, where the end, we know the end, and we actually, as creatures, as these, like, how'd you say it? Like, we're kind of like the hybrid of heaven and earth.
Uh-huh.
Um, we have we see things as their end. We see things in their purpose, but we see the end from the beginning. So we see that, and then that informs us how we should act, and which direction we should journey. So it's almost like we get the map before we start taking steps there.
Yeah.
And so you see that in these films. You see that especially in Arrival. You see that in Exodus too, where you have the land of promise, and that's what gets them through. Or with the daughter, she sees so it was her father's promise that kept her going for a whole life, and allowed her to make the greatest breakthrough of human history, solving the gravity equation, to arrive at a place where, and this gets back to Alistair Roberts and his Echoes of Exodus book. He's saying that Exodus story, where the end is the beginning, beginning is the end, or an Arrival. I used to believe in, beginnings and endings,
Mhm.
but there's like a certain confusion, right? Well, that's because the ending of one Exodus story is the beginning of another. For example, if you look at the life of Moses, he doesn't go through one Exodus, he goes through four. At
Mm,
his birth, baby in a basket, going over the sea, arriving on the other side. He goes through as a man, and his, I guess you could say it as individual Exodus. Um, Also note he was a shepherd. Like he
mm,
was at that stage, he was, to tie back to one of your first points or earlier points, he was a shepherd in the wilderness, right? He was guiding sheep animals, the animals,
mm,
um, and helping them navigate the sand of the desert during that time. He gets into his third Exodus where he's a man. And of course, these are in uh, increment of years of 40, so 40-year increments. So then he becomes the shepherd of a nation of Israel, and that's where he delivers them, and they go through together. At Sinai, they're given the promise that they would, get through. They get the map of the Ten Commandments, and they're like, "You're gonna arrive on the other side of this in the promised land that I'm going to give you, my gift to you." And you see this where, yeah, man, I just love that where he really is like the shepherd, and you see that. But then you can also see this in both Arrival and Interstellar, where there's shepherd figures. And in Interstellar, there's the father is that, or really it's the spirit of the father,
mm.
because he's the ghost, right? And so you have this idea
Oh,
where we're talking about time and we're talking about ghost and breath, right? So this like living thing that is not a materialized body, but yet there's the substance of life, or there's something that can, influence us as we live. And
wow.
so if you think of that as like they kind of lay out like a Trinitarian story where
Yeah.
you have the Father, you have the Holy Ghost, and you have the Son, or the embodiment of the Father. And you kind of
Spirit.
see them
I
playing
love
with that a little bit, right? Where you have the ghost, and the ghost is or parents are the ghosts of their children's future.
it. Mm.
That's what Coop tells his daughter. Parents are the ghosts of their children's future. And of course he is, which is really interesting. And he gets to a point where like presence is coming from that higher place that is, energizing the world around us. And, it's like that spiritual world. We are it's embedded in the physical world.
Mhm.
And you can see that analogically through this ghost, right? So the presence of the father, like he isn't there, but she feels him, she's drawn to him. There's this sense of this guidance, almost like a spirit of the shepherd.
Right. I really like what you said kind of about the spirit of the father. I had never thought about that before, but I think that that makes a ton of sense in the scope of the story, like that kind of bridge between them both. Because
Yes.
it's actually interesting, the name Cooper too, I looked it up.
Ah.
So the last name Cooper means barrel, actually.
Oh, right.
What's interesting is so for them to go through the wormhole, in a sense, it's kind of a barrel, like this going from one world to another, going through the barrel, like the wormhole. Um, and then in the beginning of the movie, and kind of a few times throughout the movie, he's piloting a spacecraft that kind of starts spinning out. And in a sense, you hear the pilot term like doing a barrel roll. He's kind of doing a barrel
Uh,
roll in a couple different instances of the thing. And then finally, at the end of the film, the space station where everybody lives, the solving the problem of gravity. Essentially, it's a giant, like cylindrical space
oh,
station
yeah.
that they live in, kind of like a giant barrel almost. So it's
Interesting. You're right.
yeah. So I thought that was super interesting. Yeah, that kind of their last name too is like prophetic of of who they are and um what they're meant to be for the world, kind of like
Right.
everything leading up to constructing this barrel like space station. And
Yeah.
then if you also think about the barrel as a bridge between worlds, I guess you could kind of think of that as somewhat of like, the spirit between two people, between the father and the daughter. There's the spirit of the father, but almost maybe kind of like the spirit of your family. You can maybe think of it
Oh
too.
yeah. Like between generations.
Yeah, between generations, absolutely. Um,
Yeah.
and when
Another
you
thing
think
is
of a cycle, that's kind of what a cycle is. It's generations and generations. And
yes. And let's think about Murphy because I like Cooper because it's a subtle like symbolism that they're introducing there. But Murphy's not so subtle. It's explicit. They spell
yeah,
it out. They're like, it's Murphy's law. Anything that can't happen will. I like that they added that because it's the other side of that tension of destiny.
hmm,
And it then later on they say it's like, you can it's time. It's like they it's the arrow of time. It's like you can bend it, you can, do all of this, but you can't go back. You can't rewind it,
yeah,
and it's like, so what will happen, you know. It's
yeah. Well, and think of too, if anything that can happen will happen, I think that gives her motivation to believe in the promise of her father. If he can come back, if he promised,
oh
like
yeah,
you
yeah,
said, a
yeah.
promise becomes a living thing. So now that he's promised something, that means that it can happen. So she believes that it will happen. I think that,
Yes. And that's the seed of belief or the
yeah,
seed of faith is like, do you believe can it happen? Is it possible? Is it possible?
right. And what you were just talking about, the promise with Exodus, right? The promise when people go into exile in the Exodus story. That's a great way to look at the promise is like as a seed kind of going into the womb. It's almost the um that fractal pattern of creation over and over again. You have the
Yeah.
seed going into the womb who receives it. So it's like the call and response.
Yeah.
A writer I love, his name is Soren Kierkegaard. He's from the 1800s, um, kind of a theologian philosopher, but he was talking about faith and about he used an example of a mother and her daughter.
Hmm.
When you're teaching your child to walk, you're holding on to them, going by the steps, but then eventually, at some point, you stand far away from your child, but you hold out your arms, and what you do, you say, "Come here, come to me," and you usher them forward.
Hmm.
And if you always held their hands, they want to learn. Eventually, they have to learn how to walk on their
All
own.
right.
But you're giving the call, and you're holding your arms out. You're saying, I'm right here. I love you. I'm not going to let you get hurt, but you need to learn to walk on your own. Say, come here, come here.
Yeah.
So there's that element of the call and then the response. So the
Hmm.
call of the parent and then the response of the child.
Yes. And yes, and there is an interesting call and response with Cooper and his daughter because yeah, it's like come out to this galaxy, right?
Yeah.
Come out to this
Yeah.
other world. And that I mean there is so if we start getting into the parts of the film that, maybe we don't like or are confused about, one is the part that I struggled with at first was like this it kind of like that environmentalism worldview of like this world. It's kind of like the Wall-E theme, where it
Yeah.
starts out as the Wall-E theme. It's like we've trashed this planet, it's toast, it's out of whack, it's overpopulated, overpolluted, and we've done it. And so it's almost like the planet lost its ghost, so to speak. And in a very extreme way, we need to get out. Like there's no saving Earth, we need to get out. And so, unlike Wall-E, which is a redemption story, so Wally, like they come back and they decide to redeem Earth, and they find a seed of hope, like literally in this form, this little pea plant, and they're like, no, like we can do this. We can. farm. We can farm pizza. Like I had to relearn a few things, obviously, but they do come back and it's a redemption story and they redeem Earth. And I love that part about Wall-E. Interstellar doesn't do that. They leave and they stay gone. And so at first I didn't like that, but then as we're talking, I'm thinking, well, what if it's like an Exodus story where they leave Egypt? And you could understand it that way, right? Where they are doing a global exodus and they're going from one world to the other, and they have to go through the void of this dark void space of the unknown, of the wilderness in between to get there.
Yeah.
Do you think that works? Like, how are we doing so far?
I'm completely with you, and I have a couple thoughts and interpretations. So
Yeah, go
I'll
for it.
give my most abstract thought first. One of the possibilities I think of Interstellar is that the whole movie is somewhat of a journey through the afterlife
Mm, go
because the
on. That's
the
interesting.
movie the movie starts off right at the start of him piloting an aircraft, and there's a voiceover that I assume is like an AI or some sort of command that's like, Cooper, we've lost control of the ship, we're going down. um or it's like, I'm taking control, so he's out of control and he's like, no,
Ah,
and starts spiraling. And then all of a sudden he jolts awake and his daughter's there, and she's like, oh, I thought you were a ghost. So it's interesting, and he's in the darkness,
yeah.
like, no, like there's no such thing as ghosts. And then later in the movie, when he's talking to Matt Damon's character, he's like, what does scientific research show you? The last thing you'll see before you die is, he's like, it's the face of your children, or
Oh, yeah,
see your
yeah,
children. Because it's an interesting idea for me, because in a sense there, he's like taking this journey to Saturn, to this black hole of Saturn. And, Saturn has, like the Roman god of Saturn, has a
yes.
lot of
Right.
ties to like agriculture, to cyclical rebirth. It's where you get the Grim Reaper. So like the hooded Grim Reaper, the veiled Reaper, because the reaping thing that he has is in a sense agricultural, but also
Oh
like
my gosh, you're right. I didn't even
dead.
think about that.
So to me, that there's a possibility that part of it is like that. And why I like that interpretation is like, whether or not he's actually dead, there's so much like symbolic rebirth throughout the movie.
Yeah.
It works either way completely fine with me. I know some people don't like the, oh, was it dead or not? But I really love the idea of like subconscious and symbolism, that in a sense, it's like, if the story's done well, I think it kind of can say the same thing. So
Okay.
it,
Yes.
if we look at it through the terms of like, if it is a story about journeying through the underworld, and might explain why he is so focused on his daughter and speaks with his daughter more often, because of how receptive she is to the ghost, and why he's speaking with her more often.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then on that term, the his co-pilots who he travels with would be more symbolic rather than actual people at that
Hmm.
point. So there's one guy called Romilly, which is like a child of Rome, I think his name translates to.
Huh.
So you have the god of Saturn they're traveling to, and the child of Rome, Roman Empire. And Anne Hathaway's name is Brand. So
Right.
like branding something. And yeah, I don't want to go too far down that wormhole, but it's an interesting idea to think about next time you watch the movie.
Oh my
It,
gosh. Yeah, yeah. So let me just
yeah, please go ahead.
let me see if I'm following you. So
Yeah.
it starts out with a dream vision of an event that happened in the past, we assume, where the main character, Coop, is picturing himself just like doing a death spiral from the
Mhm.
air in a spacecraft and plummeting to his death essentially. And then he wakes up from it and the first thing he sees is his daughter.
Hmm.
And that's so interesting. Yeah, so really they're kind of playing on that other element of memory, which is like this kind of like a prophetic visionary, that place where dreams and imagination come from. I hadn't thought about that. That is, yeah, fascinating way to start out the story, I always thought.
Yeah.
And then the rest of the story is kind of like an extension of that. And yeah, and then Matt Damon totally says it. He says, you're going to typically you see the face of your child. Coop does see the face of his child.
Yeah.
Yeah, interesting. So the other theme that at first I was like, not too excited about that. Could have done without that is at the end, whenever um sorry, what'd you call the bookshelf space when he gets into the black hole?
Tesseracts.
Tesseract.
Yeah.
Yes. So he gets into the Tesseract and then he's explicating his revelation that, oh my gosh, I can understand why this, like the how. Like I can understand how this is possible after his leap of faith, right? And it's totally like this plummeting into the darkness of the unknown, classic leap of faith moment, right? And he gets beyond that, and then he sees the how, like, oh, this is possible. Now I see now. And he says, this is possible. Like this could be us. This could be evolved humans that have advanced, several dimensions beyond our time and space realm. This so it's kind of like this humanizing thing of like
Yeah. Hmm.
where it's like, okay, so on one sense you could look at this and be like, he's trying to explain away theologically, like explain away God and be like, really, God could just be a more evolved human that has broken past this barrier of space and time and now can navigate, go in and out, and see time in a totally different way, more from eternal space. And it's so, but then on the other hand, as I watch it more, I actually kind of like that because of the effect. Maybe not so much like the nitty gritty and get into evolutionism and like all that, whatever.
Right.
Uh, but what I like is that it's almost like it sneaks you up, like holds your hand and gets you to this vista point where then before you know it, it's not a far stretch of the imagination. It's a very real thing that you're interacting with of understanding the possibility of God and how he interacts in creation, especially as, a spirit or a presence, and how you're filled with the love of the father of Cooper with his daughter. But then you're also filled with you automatically like pivot that over and be like, this is the love of God as a father for the children of his creation. And I find that is like it's a good reminder for me because it helps open me up to that dynamic where maybe in, day-to-day life you kind of forget it or you get caught up in the technicalities of this, that, and the other. And so this movie, even though maybe like there's some kind of wonky things about that part of it, I do find really helpful understanding that analogically.
Yeah. No, both points you made are actually like the 2 points I was thinking about too when watching it. And kind of how I think of it is like, it's like it's that feeling of when you're hearing someone describe something and you're like, oh, you're so close. Like, why can't you just see the answer? Like it's right there in front of you, but they
Yes.
don't see the
Yeah.
answer. So it's more so that rather than I feel like explaining it away. Like I feel like Christopher Nolan's movies always kind of show like what he's going through in a sense too.
Yeah.
Because it's like what I was talking about with Cooper's journey, that dynamic between like chasing the scientific, the rational, this sense of progress and achievement with the love of his daughter. It's he always kind of has that filter of like, how do I explain this? Oh, we must have done this. The human beings must have uh,
Right. Yeah.
built this tesseract because he doesn't know. He's not saying this is how it did happen. Like he's just thrown into that. thing. He's saying this must be how this happened. And I think with Christopher Nolan too, he was working with physicists while he was making the film. So obviously, he has a very similar outlook with Cooper in terms of even making this film. Yes, it's about the love of a father and daughter, but I want to make sure the physics are exactly right or as close to right as they can be. I want to make sure that this is done legit and right. So he's going through the same thing too. Okay, we have this transcending time and space. How do we explain that rationally? Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, I think it's a lot more so that just like constantly him on his own kind of Exodus journey, but always uh still unable to find rest. I feel like he's just still
Yeah.
unable to find that rest, still unable to like accept that love of the father for himself, which is why I wrote an article on that on my Substack. It's like eventually it's like the ultimate thing you can do is accept the love of your father. And
Mm.
I think Murph does that, but it's interesting that with Cooper, we really don't know that father dynamic with him. It's just he feels like he's kind of on his own thing. And to the extent that he does have it, it's the love he gives his daughter. So um I will say this though.
Mm.
When I first saw it in theaters, when I was talking about, tearing up at the end during that Tesseract scene when he's by himself suspended in space, I had a really, really interesting idea. And it's important for me to just think of it as an idea because it's like it's not true and it gets into a little bit of that weird space you were just talking about. But I had this idea of um, like thinking of ourselves as timeless in a sense. And I had this weird idea of like an element of being your own guardian angel to an
Mm.
extent.
Mm.
And let me explain that because it's like when he connects with his daughter and he's, giving the messages through the sand and, typing Morse code on the watch and stuff like that, sending
Uh-huh.
messages back. It's like he's able to find that moment in time and space because he loves his daughter. Like that's the connection between time and space. And I had this idea of what if you thought of yourself as a future version? So let's say like you're depressed or something, or you're scared, or you don't know what's going on. And you think of yourself 20 years in the future as someone who's married and happy and living a wonderful life and things are going great. And people say, if you could talk to your younger self, what would you say? This idea of like the love that you have when you have your stuff together, like sending a message back to your younger self.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And I just thought it was a cool idea. And I like to keep it in the realm of idea because, I don't want to get into this weird Gnostic place of like, oh, I'm my own guardian angel or I'm my own savior, because I don't believe in that. But I do think that there is something interesting about thinking that the person we are in the future over time is still someone who we are when we feel depressed and anxious
Mm.
and all that.
Mm.
And if you
Yeah,
can,
and maybe even that we're partnering with that
yeah,
guiding spirit, you know.
yeah. And if you think of love being that connection, like something that's been great for me as someone who struggled with anxiety my whole life is when I get anxious, and thank goodness I've had some good therapists who told me this. They said, just simplify things and just be kind to yourself and say, I'm going through something right now. I'm going to love myself and be kind to myself, and like this will pass. And I think that's actually a really good thing because it reminds me of Christ on the cross. It's like the sense of him living a life and showing us it's like, look how much I was persecuted, how much I was hurt. Um, but like that doesn't define me. Like the love I have for you is what defined me. Like all this stuff can't defeat my love for you.
Mhm.
And it's, it seems so simple, but that's just, I really feel like that's the thread through all this stuff. It's like, you can send us into space, aliens can come talk to us, we can thrust all this new knowledge on you, but without love, like, it all isn't complete. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Love
Yeah.
is what really brings everything together. Because,
Mm.
even with Cooper, it's like, in a sense, his life is so simple. I love my daughter, but he complicates things so much. Oh, I'm going to go to outer space. I need to listen to like fifth dimensional beings to do this stuff. And it's like, even with all that, like, all that's great. He still does it. And,
Yeah.
it's a call to adventure. But ultimately, there has to be a moment of humility where you say, and in spite of all that, the highest is love.
Yeah.
That's really hard for a lot of people, myself included, sometimes to accept.
Yeah.
It's like, how could it be that simple?
Yes. Yeah. Mm. I want to bring up Arrival.
Yeah.
So these films, and I want to also say Dune does this as well, which is one of the follow-ups uh, of Denis Villeneuve after Arrival. It's this idea of prescient vision, where if you could see the future and you see the end of how things turn out, should you continue to make those choices that lead to that end, even if it was bad? So that is an interesting question because, at an extreme level with Arrival, it's like high stakes, right? Like, and she has an even more a clearer vision of the future than we have right now. And the question is the big question as it relates to parenthood and generations. The world's not in a good spot right now, right? Aliens have attacked, or the world's falling apart. We're down to just corn. All the rest of the grain crops are gone,
Yeah.
like extinct. Blight's taken them out, which is really interesting symbolism of that contagion, that blight contagion, like a sin symbolism. And so the big question is, should we conceive children during this time? Should we bring them into the world? Should they arrive? Or should we make a choice that hinders their arrival? That is the big question. And I feel like in Arrival, she finds that the present vision changes who she is, which, to tie back to the ethics of beauty, is that he flips the transcendentals, it's beauty, goodness, truth. And so as you behold something like in its whole state, right, the heavenly pattern, and it's perfectly executed, or most accurately executed with that pattern, so heaven and earth meet, and you see that and you just behold it and you're drawn to it, drawn beyond something of just your limited existence and self, drawn into the world beyond, galaxies beyond. And then you have goodness. So then that changes your actions. It changes what you do. And then you want to leave behind the old things. And it's almost like that goodness is that rebirth, but you're doing it through your actions, like in history. You do good things according to this beautiful pattern that you've seen. And then the combination of doing those two steps with beauty and goodness, you become true. You enter into truth with a capital T.
Hmm.
And I feel like you act, like Cooper's actualized himself, right? Then once he fulfills his mission, he's reunited with his daughter, then it's like he's fulfilled his purpose. He's done it, right?
Yeah.
And then so it's kind of an interesting moment in a parent's life whenever you realize like my children are adults. I've done it, like now
Yeah.
what?
Yeah.
And then another adventure awaits. And so that part was fun. In Arrival, they have that element of that prescient vision where they can see the future, which I think is interesting step up from or different way of interacting with it than Interstellar. And what she realizes that with if you were to take life as a whole, so a whole as in the deepest sorrow, the greatest tragedy, and the greatest joys. And if
Mhm.
you look at that as like a continuum, right, instead of like a sequence of things,
Yeah,
all of it is worth it.
yeah,
All of it is worth it. That no matter how bad it is, there's good. That a person's presence in this story is better than if they weren't there at all. We can't imagine it. And so Louise comes to a point where it changes who she is. And I think the book spells this out a little bit better, but she doesn't want to fight destiny. Because it becomes who she is. The thought never even comes to her of maybe I should counteract this, maybe I should act outside of this will. It's almost like the union of wills, where I feel like they lay out a really good uh there's a really good story for theosis
yeah.
where you behold divinity, you see Christ on the cross, and you want to act in that agape goodness of self-sacrifice and in relationship to others and service to others. You want to enact that pattern, and then in the process of beholding and acting out, uh, you become that thing that you're beholding. You become what you behold,
Mhm.
and it's integration. It takes time, but you become the truth. You become that true thing, a more true version of yourself, your purified version of the purpose to which you were made. And when she does that, she's able to come to that place of acceptance, which, that acceptance of the end of things, of destiny, the acceptance of mortality and death, and realizing that she arrives at a different way of looking at death that is not so fatalistic, and she's not wrestling with it so much. She finds that rest, she finds that peace because she knows that it's part of a bigger story, and
Yeah,
that it's not death is not it might be the equalizer, but it's not the true end like we think of it.
right. Well, that makes me think of, when it's Book of Revelation, I think when it says, every knee will bow before Christ, every tongue will confess. I think that there's, like I was saying, I think there's eternity in the human heart. I think that even if people
Ah,
don't
yes.
consciously know what they're doing sometimes, they they still have Christ with them in some sense.
Yeah.
Some of the most wonderful people I know are like very staunch atheists, but they are more generous with the poor and love people more than most people I know. And I see so much of Christ's actions in them, but they just don't have the belief there yet. And when I talk to them, I get along with them very well because I love that you brought up beauty so many times because that's how I think we really need to be communicating nowadays because people have a
Yeah.
very warped view of truth and of goodness. And I actually really like that you put beauty first because it's like if they have a really warped view of truth and goodness and you just really try to go into these logical like, well, this is this and X is Y is Z, they're like, whatever.
Yeah.
Like, I think at a fundamental level, they need to really feel loved and get
Yeah.
this sense of beauty. That's always where I reach people. It's like I can have wildly different beliefs than them, but if my writing is beautiful, They're like, I don't understand what you just said, John, but it was really pretty. That's what I get like all the time. They're like, you're really pretty writing. I don't really get it, but I was captivated and kept reading. And it's like, okay, well, you know, I didn't solve anything, but I was able to reach you with that.
Yeah.
And I'm also responsive to their point of view with things, even though I don't take in any truth claims that they give.
Mm.
So kind
Yeah.
of like tying that into what you were just saying, it's like I think that if we can understand that, you know, the filmmakers and the audience and people who might not see things on like the strict religious level, I think we're getting a lot of clear indicators that like they're really looking for that. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like they
Mhm.
really feel it, they're really looking for it. It's like they keep hitting a ceiling. They keep trying to push through and they're hitting the ceiling of like, how do I rationally explain it? I can't. So I must chalk it up to love. And it's like, that's great. Wonderful. That's a huge thing to know.
Yeah.
And then from there, it's just tying that love back to the love of the Father. And I think
Yeah.
that's really um, where we're at in terms of storytellers, where we can really drive things home. And it's why I wanted to talk about Arrival, you know, love of the mother, and Interstellar, love of the father. That's like really where you can tell Arrival and Interstellar has impacted a lot of people, you know, whatever their beliefs are.
Yeah.
It's really cool seeing how much it's impacted people. And I think it's a great place to put our focus on and say, okay, well, these two stories, they really worked. Um, how can we add even more now? Here's the level they were willing to go to. How can we add a little more to point this back to God? Yeah.
Yes. So they really are a work of beauty because they're
Yeah.
impacted by what they see. They don't know why, they can't explain it, but there's something true in there. And yeah, what came to mind when you described it is like when people approach things truth first or rationally first, reminds me of like a classroom where a teacher's trying to explain, I don't know, swimming, right? Or the feeling of water. And they're
Yeah.
like, it's H2O and it's this, and it's like trying to describe everything. And then there finally comes a point where it's like, let's just push pause on this class and let's just go down to the lake. Let's go down to the creek and just like take your shoes off and just dip your toes in the water, right? And
Uh,
like,
yeah.
it's
All right.
water.
I think of two like a husband and a wife, and like a husband saying like, well, of course I love you. I took out the trash. I did this. And then she eventually
Uh-huh.
like reps and goes like, I just don't feel it from you. You know what I mean? Like if he's like, I do this, and
Yeah,
she's like, I
yeah.
just feel that connection. You know, I
Yes.
don't feel it from you. And she's just like so frustrated. She's like, you can't just keep listing only things that you do.
Yeah.
And I'm not even saying because those things are important too.
Yeah.
But without the beauty, without that feeling, it's like it can't just be that. Like I don't feel love. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, and I feel like that's what it is, even in I really don't want to get into anything political, but so I'll just say in general right now in our world, if because you know you'll see a lot of YouTube videos of like someone owned this person.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
like people who are really struggling need beauty. They really need beauty before any of that stuff. Because if it
Right.
just goes into like, well, logically, this, and if they're really struggling, they're like, I don't feel loved from you.
Hmm.
And that's what I need before I can move into anything else.
Yeah, that's a good example too, because
Yeah.
especially the dynamic of a husband and a wife.
Yeah.
Because if you had like a truth first approach to it, it would remind me, it'd be like the neuroscientist, Andrew Huberman, God
Mhm.
bless him, but like he was trying to like describe all of like the hormonal neuroscientific level of like, okay, oxytocin gets released and then this gets released, and then it's like, okay, it's like if you're going to make a child, like
Yeah.
I'm not sure if that's going to get it done by itself, as opposed to, that relational dynamic of husband and wife. And this is, John, this has been really helpful too, because where I'm at with the Arrival project is I have identified 8 chapters and written outlines for them. I published the first one with Arrival and Exodus on the Symbolic World blog. That's getting turned into a book that I'll be doing a collaboration with Colin Miller, the bookbinder. So it's going to look something like this one. I'm excited about that one. But then there's eventually it's going to be a full book with several chapters that interact and build upon each other.
Mm.
And right now, I finished the second one, which is all about language, really like the metaphysics of language. Then the third one that I'm kind of writing this one and finishing the other one. That'll get published soon. The third one is going to be about the dynamic of Luis and becoming like the heptapods and how it, this transformational process. But then right after that one, it's all about the dynamic of relationship and communion and what it really means to be in communion with, the one and the many. And so how many things can be one. And so this is really, really helpful for me because I'm starting to see how love can be like that thread that laces multiple things together into one thing. And I also how a cool thing that I realize is in Arrival, uh, the one of the main plot twists at the end, or the thing that unlocks the deeper understanding in Luis that leads to that breakthrough moment at the climax, is non-zero sum game. Because to that point, they're playing a zero sum game, which is like a competition. Who's going to be number one?
Mm.
Means there's winners and losers. But then a non-zero sum game is more like a circle. It's where like everybody has a part to play in the whole.
Yeah.
But what I found is they didn't say this, but I'll say it in the essay that gets in communion, is that marriage is a positive sum game. It's a positive sum game because you have two that come together. So that's, non-zero sum game. It's collaboration. There's not a winner or a loser. You're part of a team. But in that coming together, it's productive and it produces children. Same
Mm.
if we're just talking most typically here.
Yeah.
In that sense, it's a positive sum game because you're actually producing more than just the one unit itself.
Hmm.
And so in a way, love is life-giving because in that coming together, in that union and in that communion, that has the power of creating life, or, multiplication of growth, has the power of growth.
Yeah. A way I like to think of it is there's a saying I heard a while ago. It's like if two people exchange a dollar bill with each other, each ends up with a dollar bill. If two people exchange an idea with each other, they each have two ideas now.
Hmm,
So if I have an idea and you have an idea and we exchange, I retain my original idea and I have your idea
right.
now. Same with you. And it's the same thing with love. If I love myself, obviously as Christians, we keep that in the idea of like love yourself as your neighbor and then love God above all else. But if I have that love with me and then I love someone else and they share their love too, you keep the love you had before and you get their love as well. And kind of same with them. I don't know if it works as well as with the ideas, but
Well, it does in the sense of like a positive sum game. It's just like
yeah,
how
yeah.
Dr. John Vervaeke, he talks about dialogos or dialogos,
Mhm.
where you come together and in coming together, you arrive at conclusions or ideas that before the conversation did not exist. Like,
Mm.
and so there's one level where it's like, I have my idea, you have yours. Okay. Next level is like you had described, where I have my idea, but I receive yours and I give mine. So it's like that exchange. And then the cool thing is like in the exchange, a new idea emerges or
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
arrives, and
Uh-huh.
then you have like you're birthing something new
Yeah,
that didn't exist before those steps, before the
yeah,
coming together.
yeah. And that's like you said, in terms of marriage, with kids, that's 100% spot on. And it's honestly what I love about just the artistic process in general. Like even with writing, it can be a very solitary thing, but I try my hardest to not let it be. I love sharing my stuff with other people. What do you think about this? Or just talking about ideas before I write. What do you think about this? Because to me, it's just so much more fun that way. And it frustrates me anytime I see people try to be like too prideful with their art, like oh look, like I'm a genius because I did this or painted this. Like anytime people ask like what inspired me, like one of my favorite parts is just being like, oh, like I was inspired by this guy and this guy and this guy. Like I very rarely try to be like, oh, it's just my idea. It's all this stuff. It's a collaboration of even Interstellar and Arrival. What inspired, a story idea? Oh, it probably pulled a lot from that because those stories meant a lot to me.
Hmm.
So it's like that love, it's that
Yes.
collective love, even more than just two people, just the more people love each other in general. Like you said, it adds to creation as
Yeah.
opposed to like destruction.
Right.
Yeah.
I see you have a picture. It looks like grandparents, like a black and white photo behind you.
Yeah, great grandparents.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, I have a picture of my grandpa that I grew up with. He's no longer with us, but that tie of love and memory. Maybe this might be a good place to end it.
Yeah.
So maybe others out there, everybody has that loved one that's no longer with you, and it's like, but their life, who they are, is like impressed upon you. It's impressed upon you where it's like in a way they are with you, and you start asking questions of what would my grandpa say? What would my grandpa do? And in a way, it's almost like a prayer that's sent up, very simple prayer. Sometimes, I don't know about you, but I get answers back
Mhm.
where I know what he would say. Where sometimes there's like that soft voice that comes that says, like, and it's usually very calming, or it encourages patience, or it's a very encouraging voice of like, I'm on the other side. I see a very big picture like Cooper in the Tesseract, where it's like I see more of the forest from the trees.
Yeah.
You're gonna be fine.
Yeah.
Press on, or be patient, or whatever that encouragement is. And how that ties to men, well, but the big question is like, why do we why is that part of who we are at all? Materially, that doesn't make sense. Not even close. And so really our mind is not the deepest, most fundamental part of our being. And if that's not, then what is? And I think these movies are making the case that the heart is, which of course is a very, ancient, Christian understanding, is that the heart is the center of who we are, is the center of our being. And it's a well that we don't know how deep it goes. And the fact that eternity is there, it's almost like eternity is nested within us. And then we can see it. And like in this conversation, we can, describe it in almost metaphoric ways, that there's something beyond. But the cool thing is that it reminds me of how there's like a spark that we have, right? There's a spark in our hearts. And what is a spark attracted to? It's attracted to the fire.
Yeah.
And like this year, we have a forest out here in California, and we just wrapped up our burn season. And so around here, if you don't do control burns, then you have wildfire burns that can be pretty devastating. And so we did a bunch of control burns, and it's really interesting to see the nature of fire, where you see it like these little tiny flames if they're separated from the big burn pile. they want to they want to be a part of the big fire. And I feel like that in a way that's us. And that's our love, where we have that burning erotic love that wants to be bonded with that larger fire. And that's our hearts. That's how eternity is embedded in our hearts. And we want to ascend to that. And so that's kind of gets into that nature of, we want to ascend in we're part sky and we're part earth, like we
Yeah.
return to the fire of heaven and that heavenly love
Yeah.
that has the power to hold everything together across time. But then, we're also part of the earth. And so we got an interesting dynamic here.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. And I totally agree. And the imagery you used is actually exactly what I've been thinking of lately. The book I just finished writing is called The Hearth Spring. So hearth and
Huh.
spring I kind of merged into one word. And it's this idea of so there's kind of a secret company of people called the stewards of the word
Hmm.
throughout the story. And they're kind of like the stewards of tradition and of the logos and stuff like that. And their sanctuary is this place called the Hearth Spring. And my idea was almost kind of like you said, like you were describing the heart as a well and like fire in the same word, kind of how you were describing it. And like
Yeah.
that's essentially exactly what I was thinking of. So it's like the erotic love is like the expansive factor that looks out to the world and speaks out to the world. And then there's the inner well too, that kind of is like your inner depth. So there's part of you that goes out into the world and speaks and loves and reaches out to people. And then there's also this like inner depth, this inner well inside of you too. So I just had that idea of like just that combination of the hearth and then kind of the spring that has a mysterious source, but that flows out into the world. And I feel like that's very representative of who we are. Um, and to anyone who's interested in hearing more about that, listen to Derek's talk with Mathieu Pajot. That's
Oh,
got some of those ideas, with the fire and the water and how the
oh
ancients
yes.
looked at that. I listened to that while I was writing the book, and it just like completely changed how
Ah,
I was like, oh my God, dude, this is so good. It
yeah.
was amazing.
Nice.
Yeah. Yeah.
And glad it helped.
Yeah.
Hey, see, we're getting better at the plugs here.
Yeah. There we go.
Cool. Well, John, cool, man. Good getting to know you. Thanks for sharing your ideas. And I do believe it was a positive sum game. And
Absolutely.
I look forward to looking into more of your other work. And I encourage other people to do the same.
Yeah.
Best of luck on this book, man. It sounds like it'll be an interesting one.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah, it's probably in the next couple months. I'm hoping to release it and
Oh, wow, cool.
yeah. Yeah. So
Are you
it's
going to
exciting.
self-publish or is it going to be through a publisher?
I'm gonna do a Kickstarter campaign. So I've
Oh, cool.
really been planning. So the book you mentioned at the start of our talk, I actually wrote that probably about like 6, 7 years ago. So over those years, I've really been kind of just trying to develop my writing skills and think about what I really want to put my energy behind, and I've found a main character, almost kind of like Harry Potter, that I want to continuously write a series around so that through time you follow this family name, this family character
Hmm.
throughout all the different books. And he's kind of like the nexus of all the storytelling that I'm going to do, at least for the foreseeable future. So I'm
Awesome.
really excited for what's to come. Yeah.
Sounds like you'll be pulling that thread for a while.
Oh yeah. I hope so.
Okay, John. Well, until next time, thanks for coming on.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me.
Got it.